It started as a typical Saturday chore. I'd taken the car to the driveway to vacuum out the seats, something Judy and I usually made a habit of every weekend. She liked to keep things clean and organized, a trait I used to admire, though now it feels more like an excuse to keep secrets hidden. As I reached under the passenger seat to clear out the inevitable crumbs and debris, my hand brushed against something unexpected. Something cold and metallic. I pulled it out and stared at it for a moment. A bracelet. Slim, silver, with a tiny engraved heart dangling from the chain. It was elegant, feminine. Exactly the kind of thing Judy would never wear. She wasn't into jewelry. She always said it got in the way at work. This bracelet didn't belong to her, but it definitely didn't belong to me either. The engraving on the heart caught my eye. Forever yours. I turned it over in my hands, tracing the words with my thumb. My chest tightened as the possibilities raced through my mind. We shared this car, and Judy was meticulous about keeping it spotless. If it had been there for even a day, she would have noticed. So how had it ended up here? And more importantly, whose was it? I placed it on the passenger seat and stepped back, trying to piece it all together. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windshield, catching the polished surface of the bracelet and making it gleam like it was mocking me. This wasn't just a random item someone had dropped. This was something intimate, personal, a silent question I wasn't ready to answer. Judy came home a couple of hours later, smiling as she carried a grocery bag in one hand and her work tote in the other. "Hey, hon," she called out, setting everything down on the counter. "How was your day?" I hesitated, unsure how to respond. The bracelet was still in my pocket, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. "Fine," I said finally. My voice sounded strange even to me. "Just did some cleaning." She didn't seem to notice my tone, breezing past me to unpack the groceries. She was so casual, so normal, and I felt a wave of doubt creep in. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe, but my gut told me otherwise. That night, as we sat together on the couch watching our usual sitcom, I couldn't focus on the screen. Judy laughed at all the right moments, leaning into me like she always did, but I felt distant. Disconnected. My mind kept circling back to the bracelet. Why hadn't I asked her about it? Was it because I didn't want to know the answer? I tried to convince myself it could have belonged to someone else. A friend, maybe. Judy gave rides to people from work sometimes. Maybe it had fallen out of someone's bag. But that didn't make sense. She would have mentioned it, wouldn't she? She would have noticed it herself when cleaning the car, the same way she noticed every smudge and crumb. When she went upstairs to get ready for bed, I stayed behind, staring at the bracelet like it held all the answers. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just a misplaced trinket. It felt like a crack in the foundation of something I thought was solid. Something I thought I could trust. I slipped it back into my pocket before heading upstairs. Judy was already in bed, scrolling through her phone with that same relaxed smile on her face. She looked up as I walked in. "Everything okay?" she asked, her tone light and easy. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." She bought it, nodding and setting her phone on the nightstand before turning off the light. I lay down beside her, but sleep didn't come. My mind raced through every possible explanation, each one worse than the last. The bracelet wasn't mine, and it wasn't Judy's. That left only one possibility. It belonged to someone else. Someone who had been in our car without my knowledge. The weight of that thought pressed down on me as I stared at the ceiling. I knew I couldn't let this go, but I also knew I couldn't confront her. Not yet. Something told me I needed more. More evidence. More clarity. Whatever this was, it wasn't something I could solve with a simple question. No, this needed to be handled carefully. Deliberately. The bracelet stayed in my pocket, a burning secret I wasn't ready to share. Not yet. But deep down, I already knew. This was just the beginning. I couldn't let go of the bracelet. It stayed in my pocket like a lead weight, a constant reminder that something was wrong. Judy didn't seem to notice anything was off, moving through our days like everything was fine. But it wasn't. I started watching her closely, noticing the little things I might have overlooked before. That evening, Judy came home later than usual. "Yoga ran over," she said casually, setting her bag down by the door. She kissed me on the cheek, her tone light and natural. The instructor wanted to try some new moves. It was intense, but I feel amazing. Her voice was calm, but her actions didn't add up. As she walked upstairs to shower, I glanced at her yoga bag sitting by the door. It looked untouched, sitting there just as neatly as it always did. Was I reading too much into this? Or was there something she wasn't telling me? The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about her bag. I waited until she left for work, then carefully unzipped it. Everything inside was neatly folded, her leggings, towel, and a full water bottle. The mat was still in the corner of the living room, right where it had been all week. She hadn't taken it with her, not once. My hands trembled as I closed the bag and put it back exactly as I'd found it. My mind raced. If she wasn't going to yoga, then where was she? And why lie about it? The thought made my chest tighten. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, but every instinct screamed at me that something was wrong. Over the next few days, I kept my distance emotionally, trying to gather more pieces of the puzzle. Judy's schedule seemed normal on the surface. Work during the day, yoga in the evenings twice a week, but her behavior told a different story. She was a little too cheerful when she came home, her laugh a little too forced. She lingered on her phone more often, always keeping it within arm's reach. Once, I caught her tilting the screen away from me when a notification popped up. Then there was the scent. It was faint, but it was there, a hint of cologne clinging to her hair and clothes after her supposed yoga classes. It wasn't mine, and it certainly wasn't her shampoo. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed more than vague suspicions and small inconsistencies. I started noting everything down in my head: the days she left for yoga, the time she came home, the scent of cologne. Each new clue added to the growing knot in my stomach. Judy didn't notice the shift in me. She still kissed me goodbye in the mornings, still laughed at my jokes in the evenings. But there was a distance between us now, a chasm growing wider with every unanswered question. I felt like I was living with a stranger. The bracelet had been the first clue, but now there were so many more. And they all pointed to one thing: she was hiding something. I just didn't know what. Not yet. But I was determined to find out. 2 days later, I told Judy that I'd be working late and wouldn't be home until 10. She kissed me goodbye as usual, her smile light and her tone cheerful. "Don't overwork yourself," she said before heading to work. But I had no intention of staying late at the office. I knew exactly what time he was scheduled to see her. On my way back from work, I parked a block away from the house and waited. The minutes felt like hours as I sat in the car, my fingers tapping against the steering wheel. Finally, just before 8, the front door opened. Judy stepped out, dressed in jeans and a blouse, not her usual yoga attire. My chest tightened. She glanced up and down the street, her movements quick, almost nervous. Then she walked briskly down the driveway. I watched as she reached into her pocket, pulling out her phone. Moments later, headlights appeared at the corner. A sleek, black sedan rolled up in front of the house. Judy glanced over her shoulder once before stepping off the curb and sliding into the passenger seat. The door shut, and the car pulled away. I sat there for a moment, frozen. My heart pounded in my ears, my breath coming in shallow bursts. She hadn't seen me, hadn't even thought to look for my car. I told myself to stay calm, to think this through. But my instincts were screaming. This wasn't just a casual ride. Whoever was driving that car wasn't just a friend. Pulling out onto the street, I followed at a safe distance, my headlights off. The black sedan weaved through the neighborhood, eventually merging onto the main road. My grip on the wheel tightened as I trailed behind, careful to keep other cars between us. It was risky, but I couldn't stop now. The car eventually pulled into the parking lot of a small, dimly lit restaurant on the edge of town. I parked a few spots away, keeping my head low. Judy stepped out first, followed by a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, well-dressed, and far too comfortable as he placed a hand on the small of her back. She didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Instead, she smiled at him, the kind of smile that had been missing between us for weeks. They walked inside together, disappearing through the doors. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My chest felt like it might cave in. This was it. I had my answer, even if I didn't want to believe it. Judy wasn't at yoga. She was here, with him. I sat there for what felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. My thoughts raced, my emotions cycling between rage and despair. Part of me wanted to storm into that restaurant, demand an explanation right there in front of everyone. But what would that accomplish? I needed more than just this. If I confronted her now, she'd twist the story, find a way to talk her way out of it. No, I needed to be smart, deliberate. When they finally emerged, they looked even more comfortable than before. The man opened the car door for her, his hand brushing hers as she climbed inside. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was routine. I stayed parked, watching as the black sedan pulled away into the night. Once they were gone, I started the engine and headed home. My mind was a whirlwind, every scenario playing out in vivid detail. She was lying to me. I didn't know how long this had been going on or how deep it ran, but one thing was clear. The woman I thought I knew had been hiding a side of herself I couldn't ignore. When I got home, she wasn't there yet. But she returned shortly after I arrived. We barely spoke. I'm not sure what I was waiting for. I didn't sleep that night. Judy lay next to me, peaceful and unaware, while my mind churned through everything I'd seen. Her lies, the man, the bracelet, every piece of the puzzle fit together in a way I couldn't ignore. By the time the sun came up, I'd made my decision. It was time to confront her. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, second-guessing every word out of her mouth. The next evening, when she walked through the door, I was ready. I'd set the stage carefully. The bracelet sat in the middle of the coffee table, glinting under the light. My heart pounded as I waited, seated on the couch with my arms crossed. Judy smiled as she stepped inside, oblivious to the storm brewing. "Hey, hon," she said, dropping her bag by the door. Her tone was casual, cheerful, but she froze when her eyes landed on the bracelet. The smile faltered, replaced by something else. Confusion? Fear? It was hard to tell. "What's this?" I asked, my voice calm but cold. I gestured toward the bracelet, keeping my expression neutral. Inside, I was anything but. She hesitated, a flicker of something crossing her face. "Oh, that," she said, forcing a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "It's Jessica's. She must have dropped it when I gave her a ride last week. I meant to give it back to her." "Stop lying, Judy." I leaned forward, my voice sharper now. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. "I've been paying attention. You haven't been going to yoga. You've been meeting someone." Her mouth opened, then closed again. For a moment, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Of course I've been going to yoga. Why would you say that?" I let out a bitter laugh, the sound sharp and humorless. "Because I followed you, Judy. I saw you. You got into his car, went to dinner with him. So don't stand there and insult my intelligence by pretending nothing's going on." Her face drained of color, and for a moment, I thought she might faint. "It's not what you think," she said quickly, her voice rising in pitch. "He's just a friend. Someone I knew in college. We ran into each other a few weeks ago, and he wanted to catch up. That's all it is. A friend," I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. I stood, closing the distance between us. "Friends don't pick you up in secret. Friends don't put their hands on your back like that. Do you think I'm stupid? She flinched at my words, her hands wringing together as she looked away. I didn't mean for it to seem like that, she said softly. I didn't want to tell you because I knew you'd overreact. Overreact? I shot back, my voice rising. You've been lying to me for weeks, sneaking around, meeting him behind my back, and you expect me to just accept it because you're calling him a friend? Tears welled up in her eyes, but they didn't soften me. I didn't do anything wrong, she insisted, her voice breaking. It was never physical. We just talked. I needed someone to talk to, someone who, she cut herself off, pressing her lips together. Someone who what? I demanded, stepping closer. Someone who isn't me? Is that it? I can't verify whether you were with him physically or not. But every time, you pretended you were going to yoga, while you were actually with him. You didn't even take your workout clothes out of the bag. And now I'm supposed to believe you? Her silence was answer enough. I stared at her, my chest tight with a mix of anger and pain. You should have come to me, I said, my voice low. If something was missing in this marriage, you should have told me. Instead, you chose this. Him. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't know how to tell you. I shook my head, stepping back. Her apologies felt hollow, meaningless in the face of what she'd done. It's too late for that, I said, my voice cold. You've already made your choice. Judy stood there, her face crumpling as the weight of my words hit her. But I couldn't bring myself to care. She'd lied to me, betrayed me, and no amount of tears could change that. The truth was out now, and there was no going back. The house was suffocatingly quiet after our confrontation. Judy went to bed eventually, her sobs echoing down the hallway before they faded into silence. I stayed in the living room, staring at nothing, my mind caught in an endless loop of what had just unfolded. Her excuses, her tears, they played over and over, but none of it brought clarity. If anything, it only deepened the ache in my chest. I couldn't stop asking myself, how did we get here? Was this my fault? Had I been too distant, too focused on work or my own routines to notice when she started slipping away? Her words rang in my ears. I needed someone to talk to. It felt like an indictment, a subtle way of blaming me for her betrayal. But no, I refused to let her shift the responsibility. Whatever struggles she'd been facing, she'd had a choice. She could have talked to me. We could have worked through it together. Instead, she chose to lie, to sneak around, to find comfort in someone else. That wasn't on me. I grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the cabinet and poured myself a drink. The burn as it went down my throat was a welcome distraction, but it didn't dull the pain. I'd built my life around Judy, our routines, our plans, the future we'd talked about. Now, all of it felt like a lie. Every memory was tainted by what I knew now. Every time she'd smiled at me, kissed me, told me she loved me, I couldn't help but wonder. Was it real? Or was she thinking about him? The thought made my stomach churn. I slammed the glass down on the table, the sharp sound cutting through the silence. This wasn't who I was. I wasn't the kind of man who wallowed, who let someone else's choices define him. If she didn't value what we had, that was on her. But it didn't make the betrayal sting any less. The next morning, Judy tried to talk to me. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her eyes puffy and red. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice cracking. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I swear, it wasn't physical. I made a mistake, but it doesn't have to end us. I stared at her, the words catching in my throat. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to cling to the possibility that it was just an emotional affair, that it hadn't crossed a line I couldn't forgive. But deep down, I knew better. Her lies had broken something fundamental between us. Even if she was telling the truth, how could I ever trust her again? I don't think you understand what you've done, I said finally, my voice low. It's not just about what happened with him. It's the lies, the secrecy. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed us. She flinched, her shoulders shaking as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I'll do anything, she said, her voice desperate. Therapy, counseling. I'll cut him out of my life completely. Just tell me what I need to do to fix this. I shook my head, the weight of her words pressing down on me. You can't fix it, Judy. You can't unring the bell. This isn't something you can just apologize for and make go away. Her sobs filled the room as I stood and walked away. I needed space, time to think. Every step felt heavier than the last as I grabbed my keys and left the house. The crisp morning air hit my face, a stark contrast to the suffocating tension inside. I drove aimlessly, the hum of the engine the only sound to keep me company. I found myself at a park on the edge of town, the kind of place we used to go together when we first started dating. I sat on a bench, staring out at the empty playground, and let my thoughts unravel. I didn't know what came next. The life I'd built with Judy felt like it was crumbling beneath me, and I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. Part of me wanted to believe her, to fight for what we'd built. But another part, the louder, angrier part, told me it was over. Trust was the foundation of any relationship, and ours had been shattered. I didn't know if it could ever be rebuilt. By the time I got home, the sun was beginning to set. Judy was waiting for me in the living room, her expression hopeful but hesitant. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood in the doorway, the weight of the day pressing down on me. Finally, I nodded. "We can talk," I said, my voice steady. "But I don't know if it's going to change anything." Her face fell, but she nodded, as though bracing herself for what was to come. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of the end. The next few days felt like walking through the ruins of something I'd once cherished. Judy and I moved around the house like strangers, our conversations clipped and emotionless. The weight of what had happened pressed down on every moment. I tried to focus on work, on anything that didn't remind me of her betrayal, but it was impossible. Every corner of the house carried a memory, and every glance at her only brought fresh pain. Judy tried to reach out, but I couldn't meet her halfway. Her apologies felt hollow, her promises meaningless. I'd heard it all before, and none of it erased the image of her stepping into another man's car. Trust wasn't something you could rebuild with words alone, and my trust in her was gone. One evening, as I sat at the dining table staring at an untouched dinner, Judy came in quietly and sat across from me. She looked exhausted, her face pale and drawn. "I know you're not ready to forgive me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I need to know if there's any part of you that still wants to try." I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt a pang of something. Regret, sadness, maybe even love. But it wasn't enough. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. Every time I see you, all I can think about is what you did. The lies, the secrecy. It's like everything we had was built on a lie." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't try to argue. She nodded slowly, as though she'd been expecting this. "I know I hurt you," she said, "and I know I have no right to ask for another chance. But I'll keep fighting for us, even if you can't right now." Her words hung in the air, but they didn't have the impact she seemed to hope for. They felt like the desperate pleas of someone who knew they'd already lost. I stood up and walked to the living room, leaving her at the table with her untouched dinner. I needed space, time to think. But deep down, I knew the decision had already been made. The next morning, I packed a bag. It wasn't a dramatic exit, no slamming doors or shouted accusations. I simply told her I needed some time to clear my head. Her tears started again, but she didn't try to stop me. She just stood in the doorway, watching as I walked to the car with my bag slung over my shoulder. "I'm sorry," she whispered as I opened the car door. I paused, looking back at her one last time. "So am I said, before getting in and driving away. I checked into a motel on the edge of town, A sterile, impersonal space that felt like exactly what I needed. It gave me time to think, to reflect on everything that had happened. Part of me wanted to fight for our marriage, to believe that we could find a way back to what we once had. But the other part, the part that had been growing louder every day, told me it was over. Some things couldn't be undone, and some wounds couldn't be healed. A week later, I met with a lawyer. Filing for divorce felt like admitting defeat, like I was giving up on something I'd vowed to protect. But it also felt like freedom, a chance to start over, to build something new out of the wreckage. Judy sent me long, heartfelt messages, begging for another chance, but I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Now, months later, I'm still trying to make sense of it all. Some days, I wake up and wonder if I made the right choice. Other days, I know I did. Trust isn't something you can rebuild once it's been broken, and I couldn't live the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, questioning her every move. I'm not sure what the future holds, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like it's mine to decide. Judy's betrayal was the end of one chapter, but it doesn't have to define the rest of my story. For now, that's enough. What would you have done in my shoes? Let me know your thoughts.